Listen and understand. That Terminator is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop, ever, until you're dead. Or until you shoot it. A lot. We're taking a quick peek at Terminator Resistance. Terminator Resistance is a first-person shooter based on James Cameron's Terminator film franchise. While people may have many mixed opinions about the series as a whole, few would argue against the first two films being cinematic classics, and it's very likely that you've seen at least one of them before, so you kind of know what you're in for here. The game was made by Teon, a Polish developer mostly known for the Heavy Fire series of on-rail shooters, as well as Rambo the Video Game, another movie license title that was very negatively received. A lot of the company's back catalog is full of unavailable shovelware, and it's easy to assume that Resistance would fall into the same boat, but assumptions can be wrong. It really feels like Teon put just about everything they had into this game, since it's unlike anything they've ever released. While it is a first-person shooter, it's not on rails this time, and instead lets players walk around multiple levels that are rather sizable in their own right. There's also a narrative focus, with dialogue options when talking to different characters that affect how much they'll trust you, and the game really feels like a Bethesda-style Fallout, or even an immersive sim like Deus Ex. The overall story of the game follows the basic plot of the films. An artificial intelligence called Skynet becomes sentient one day and decides that the greatest threat to it were humans, and that the best course of action was to terminate them all. After nuking the globe, Skynet begins sending out an army of machines called Terminators to finish off anyone who may still be alive. And this is where Resistance picks up. While set in the same universe, the game doesn't take place during any of the films, and is instead its own offshoot. Players take on the role of Jacob Rivers, a member of the Resistance, hence the word Resistance in the game's title. His entire squad was killed by one of Skynet's newest projects, and he's not doing so hot himself. He comes across a small group of survivors while trying to reconnect with the Resistance to inform them of what happened to his team. These survivors are the game's main cast, and follow Rivers throughout his mission as he deals with being put on Skynet's hit list, with its new project, an infiltrator, specifically trying to hunt him down. It's not a bad setup for a Terminator game, as it includes many staples of the franchise. John Connor makes an appearance here and there, as well as the iconic metallic skeletons of the T-800s, and the imposing hunter-killers. Resistance does a fantastic job of recreating the future war setting from the films, which is both a good and bad thing. At this point in time, there have been many games set in the post-apocalypse, and while the dark gray ruins of Terminator's Future Wars was fine for the few moments it showed up in the original films, it all kinda blends together in a game lasting multiple hours. It almost entirely takes place in destroyed cities, and even though Jacob is supposedly going to different locations throughout the game, I had a real difficult time telling them apart. There was one section that stood out from the others where you found yourself going through a forest, and while it's a nice change of pace, it only lasted a short time before you're thrown back into gray rubble. The game isn't anything graphically special either, with a lot of it coming off rather compressed. The most there is to really differentiate one area from another are the enemies you'll be facing. Resistance is a first-person shooter after all, and it wouldn't be much of one without guns and things to shoot at. Basic Terminators like spider drones or flying robots are susceptible to normal human firearms, but things get more complicated as the game goes on. Shooting has some good feedback overall, with automatic weapons like the Uzi or more powerful M16 doing a good job to easily put down smaller foes. The shotgun especially stands out since it can take down drones in only a couple of hits, and honestly, for a while it was difficult to believe the humans were having such a difficult time against the machines with how easy they were to destroy. While they all do have health bars, none of them really felt like damage sponges, which is a good thing. But I could also easily deal with many of them just by using the wonky melee attack, which makes them rather unimposing. There is a rather basic stealth system in the game where enemies can detect you and become alerted to your presence, but I can't say I ever really had much of a reason to use it. Rivers has access to something called Ultra Vision goggles that let him see enemy locations through walls, which would be a good way to avoid the machines if there was much of an incentive to do so. There are only a few sections at the start of the game that really make players have to use these stealth mechanics. Bullet-firing weapons are fine for basic bots, especially when getting critical hits by shooting the red glowing bits, but they are completely ineffective against more advanced foes like the T-800s. These literal chrome domes can only really be damaged by plasma weapons, and they show up before Rivers gets his hands on any. In this early part of the game, you can't really fight back if you happen to be spotted, so taking the stealthy route is really your only option. They will take damage from explosions, but there's a limit to how many explosives you can carry at the time, even if you happen to be making your own using the game's crafting system. While Terminator Resistance has a RPG-style progression system, I wouldn't really call it an RPG. Players will gain experience points to unlock skills in a skill tree, but most of them are pretty uninteresting. Few, if any, do much to change up gameplay, as most are just your basic do more damage or take more damage upgrades. There's even one that makes you level up faster, and none of them have any downsides for choosing one over the other. Only one of them could possibly affect the game at some point, and that's the weapon upgrades. If you put enough points into it, you unlock the ability to wield the T-800's plasma rifles, and it may be possible to do that before the game just gives you a plasma rifle of your own, but I'm honestly not sure. Once the game gets going, there are a lot of options to deal with enemies, and you don't really have to sneak around as much. Levels are split between large open spaces with multiple main and side objectives that can be completed in any order you want, or more straightforward linear sections. While large open levels are nothing on the scale of some other titles, they still offer plenty of routes to take through them with tons of stuff to find. Crafting materials can be pretty much anywhere, and honestly I found myself a bit overwhelmed with them. As long as you're exploring, you'll easily be flushed with supplies, be it ammo, health packs, or items to trade. It's to the point that I rarely had a reason to trade with people, since I could pretty much find anything I'd need, and I quickly found myself riding up against the maximum inventory limit for how much stuff can be carried at a time. For a game that's trying to make you feel like the underdog, Resistance does a real bad job at it. While levels are filled with a wide variety of enemies, I found them to be more of a playground than overly threatening. Enemies can easily get the better of you if you aren't paying attention, but the good news is that they're kind of stupid. It's easy enough to lead the machines into explosive traps you've placed, or act quickly enough to jam an insta-kill electric knife into their neck. Turret emplacements can be shot and destroyed, but they're also hackable through a relatively simple minigame. They can be worthwhile allies to have, as they'll attack anything that isn't you and do a good job turning robots into scrap. There's almost always multiple ways to deal with any situation, which is great to see, but few are worth the extra effort opposed to just holding your ground and shooting. I only found a few parts of the game to be all that difficult, even while playing on hard mode. Plasma weapons are just way too powerful for how plentiful they become, and combined with hitting weak points for critical damage, even the biggest enemies will fall without too much of a fuss. You can even upgrade plasma weapons with different chipsets to improve their stats, making them even more of a powerhouse. Most of the time if I died or had to reload a save, it was because I was trying to do something stupid, like hit a T-800 with a lead pipe. I would advise against that. Resistance mostly uses autosaves for its checkpoints, but larger levels do have safe houses with both a crafting bench and a terminal to make your own saves. As long as you save regularly, it shouldn't be too troublesome whenever death finds you, or when you get a failure state for being too far away from NPCs you're supposed to be following. There's a good bit of character interaction throughout where different people will talk about how they've survived so long in a world run by machines, and they can give you extra side quests to complete. It's nothing super in-depth or crazy, and the game will still hit the same major story beats regardless of what you do or how you talk to people, but it's at least something to help give Resistance more personality. There's tons of notes to find, as well as some people in the background to listen to fill you in on more background information and lore if that's something you happen to be going for. But I do have to say this. Just because you have somebody in your game question as to how a buggy got into a small hallway only accessible by a staircase, doesn't mean you get away with having a buggy in a small hallway only accessible by a staircase. It still doesn't make sense as to how that got in there.
I don't get it. How did they bring that buggy down here?
One of the main side quests you'll come across while scrounging through the leftovers of civilization are Skynet outposts. These are heavily fortified areas filled with enemies where the goal is to destroy plasma generators hidden there, either by hacking a main computer to overload them or shooting them yourself. While none of them really gave me all that much trouble, they are definitely where the game's mechanics come together. Sneaking around to hack turrets or going in guns blazing are both viable options depending upon what upgrades you have at the time, and figuring out how to crack them was a good bit of fun. Overall, Terminator Resistance is a solid FPS that does a good job realizing the Terminator universe in video game form. There have been games in this franchise before with varying quality, and Resistance is definitely up there at the top of the list, even if it can be a bit on the easy side. It's kind of a shame, really, as the early parts of the game where you don't have a lot of weapons or options to work with and have to avoid anything stronger than a Roomba can be rather tense and make for some exciting gameplay. It really made the T-800s come off as menacing, since even one could be a massive threat and you couldn't do all that much about it. Once you get your hands on a decent arsenal, however, things change from being the mouse to being the cat, and there's very little outside of a boss fight with the Infiltrator Terminator itself that stands out as challenging. If you're a fan of the Terminator series, then there's a lot to get out of this game, since it delves into the future war setting, painting a bleak scene of how the world has changed. If you aren't much of a fan of the films, there is still a lot to get out of the game. It's got satisfying shooting mechanics, open level design with multiple paths through areas, and plenty of options to deal with Skynet's menacing machines. It's just that you may want to up the difficulty setting to get as much out of the game as you really can. Also, there's dogs, so it's got that going for it. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you think of the game or this video in the comments section. I'm Omega Pie Man, and I'll talk to you guys later. Want to see more of my stuff? Click on the video on the left for a look at Xenocrisis, a fast and frantic top-down arena shooter. Or click on the video on the right for more first-person action with Sniper Ghost Warrior contracts.